At the moment, I'm not quite sure how to talk about this play. Yet it is relatively simple. It consists of a series of moments without declared unity or narrative coherence. It resembles more a succession of small fictional fragments, like short stories, on a roughly common theme. However, it is not an abstract play. On the contrary, it follows a vein of realistic and humorous writing that began with Je Tremble and Pinocchio and was accentuated with circles and fictions, Ma Chamber Freud, Cendrillon, and La Grande et Fabuleuse Histoire du Commerce. In addition to being realistic, it is a theater of action, as I have already formulated, more than a theater of text or textual poetry. This theater, it seems to me, is valuable for what it engages between individuals, what it shows, and what it suggests on a relational and existential level, rather than for what it says or formulates. I believe that in this theater, for example, many banalities are formulated. The style of textual writing is hardly interesting or sophisticated, let alone original. It is realistic theater, which could almost be called situational theater, but I prefer the term theater of action, which is funnier and more ambiguous. That is to say, action prevails over words. It is realistic theater, therefore, that is simple and comprehensible, with relatively concrete psychology, without a backdrop. However, in this play, the reunification of the two Koreas, there is no narrative unity. At the moment we are speaking, the writing work is not finished, and the coherence that could support this project is still being sought. And I would certainly plead guilty if it is still not there by January 17. I am nevertheless trying to find it, but in an unpremeditated and perhaps even irrational way. I am looking for something that could reveal itself to me as our work progresses, writing on paper and on stage with the actors. Hence the difficulty, of course, of talking today about something unestablished, which will take shape. More concretely, this play starts with a scene from Bergman's script, Scenes from a Marriage. There are several other fictional fragments, 3 exactly out of about 20 in total, inspired by Schnitzler. One of his short stories, Nothing But a Dream, and a play, La Ronde. I would like to emphasize that these names I mentioned are not necessarily sources of overall inspiration, but, in Schnitzler's case, are sparks of inspiration for these 3 fragments of the whole. For Bergman, I borrowed only a very small moment from his wonderful film. I wanted to start with him and this little scene to set something, to open a very particular theme. In terms of influence, I could cite Chekhov, particularly his short stories and one-act plays, cruel and humorous, almost satirical. There is something in me that corresponds very strongly to that sensibility. I could also describe this ongoing play as spontaneous, to differentiate it from plays written more thoughtfully and matured, such as Ma Chamber Freud, Cendrillon, and Les Marquand's. Spontaneous plays, such as Je Tremble and Circles and Fictions, which find themselves as they are being made, with precise materials at the start, but unrefined materials in the sense that crude oil is refined. And also, spontaneous plays because they were first constituted in relation to a specific theater space, and not from a fictional or intellectual concept, a writing idea in the usual sense. Scenography has always been a determining factor in my writing and inspiration. A scenography of emptiness, of spaces without matter foundations, architectures calling for lights and sounds to fully reveal themselves. That's why the encounter with Eric Sawyer, a light designer, was so important to me, as was the encounter with François Lemery, for sound. It is from there that my imagination as an author and writer gets going. At the very beginning of my formation as an author, in the early 1990s, it was because I could define and visualize theatrical spaces precisely that I was able to free myself as a writer, and thus start writing. Writing body movements, silent displacements, stillness, before any words. Alone in front of a blank page or a computer, I would have been blocked, I'm sure of it, imagining gestures, then words, sounds, transcribing words heard inside oneself, developing an imagination, forming scenic images, and above all, feeding an inspiration. That is to say, a desire to create and invent. It is thanks to a concrete relationship with space that I was able to do that. That's why I often say that I am not a director, because without a concrete inner vision of space, or if one were imposed on me that had not taken root inside me, I would be unable to create. I say that I am not a director, because I could not work in writing universes or scenographic spaces that were not naturally connected to me and emerged from me. These other so-called spontaneous plays that I talk about are thus Je Tremble and Circles and Fictions, and have as their trigger the relationship to space. A fictional place in the case of Je Tremble. Theater within the theater, red curtain, cabaret, between physical and mental reality, a place of all possibilities and paradoxes, a resonance chamber of the intimate and spectacle of thought, and a circular scenography for circles and fictions. A playground in the center of a tier, therefore in a circle, the actor surrounded by the audience. Regarding the reunification of the two Koreas, its essential starting point was the desire to work in a bi-frontal space, that is to say, two tiers of spectators facing each other, stretched laterally, creating a central playground, like a corridor between two mountains. A more banal space than the circle. A confined space in which I had never evolved yet. What I mean by that is that in many examples, including this latest creation, the scenographic space is the primary dramaturgical element of my plays, the source of inspiration that will drive the writing. Then came, regarding the reunification, the choice of more classical dramaturgical materials, themes, subjects, fictional starting points, materials that were explored and tested in the real conditions of the bi-frontal during 2 research workshops, organized for about 50 actors in total during 2 one-month sessions in Brussels. Many essential elements of this creation emerged from these workshops, and I would like to pay tribute here to all these actresses and actors who trusted me, with whom I loved working, and who inspired me. I would like to thank them. I have asked 5 of them if they would like to join the project team. They accepted. Including the time of these 2 workshops in Brussels, we will have conducted almost 6 months of work and research in conditions almost real for representation and in this bi-frontal space. To return to the reunification of the 2 Koreas more concretely, one could say that this play is presented in the form of a series of small fictional fragments. These fragments are singular and closed moments, unlike circles and fictions, where one could talk about narrative threads that prolonged and overlapped others. Here, each piece is unique. It is not weaving, but rather mosaic. Singular pieces, shards are juxtaposed. It is a small nuance, but it is important. In circles and fictions, there was an almost serial element. Here, we are more on the side of a sum of small stories. But as in circles and fictions, I hope that all these fragments, these small drawings, will compose a larger drawing, perhaps abstract but nevertheless significant. We might need to talk about the title. If there is a certain mystery in the title, obviously, it must be preserved. It is like the end of a suspense film. It should not be revealed to those queuing in front of the cinema. It is essential. For me, the title is something that must reveal itself to the one immersed in the work. That is when it takes on its full meaning. With Les Marquand's Circles and Fictions, or Ma Chamber Freud, it was already the case. One cannot understand everything a title wants to signify before seeing it. This title is particularly enigmatic, it is true. Its strangeness must be maintained. It provokes imagination, and in that, the work of the play already begins. Imagination is precisely related to what this play is about. But, since I am struggling, I see, to talk about this play itself, I would like to mention the artistic vein, the furrow we are currently digging, my team and I, under my impetus. I would describe this furrow as relatively conventional or academic. I believe that with my company's collaborators, we have gradually created precise working principles and formal principles that we keep perfecting. I believe this gives us the means for a certain creativity. We have created tools and frameworks, and thus we can invent and produce with a certain efficiency, a pejorative term in art, and probably rightly so. At the moment, as I said at the beginning of this interview, I would situate my work as a playwright on the side of psychological realism. This since Je Tremble, and after Les Marquand's This is accompanied by a deepening of humor, which was present from the beginning in my plays but not developed, rather restrained. With the plays preceding and including Les Marquand's, we were in a false realism, in the sense that the stories and characters with their way of speaking were valuable only for the abstract and underlying dimension to which they were connected. The psychology was more depth psychology than naturalistic psychology. The characters embodied more than themselves, they embodied ideas and poetic notions, they were not inscribed in a precise temporality. My stories and characters evolved in a timeless framework. At that time, I talked about reality and the real, and it caused a lot of confusion. My aims were more abstract than naturalistic, and I adhered to this notion of the real, while explaining that for me, the real applied more to the principles of my theatricality than to my stories themselves, which had everything but the appearance of reality. None of my characters were really credible. The first ones to be credible were the characters in the play, Scenography. I was searching for the real, as I see it, which is much more abstract than figurative, and also as reconstruction, refabrication of it, as if I had wanted, almost like an alchemist, to create pure reality. Today, in my latest plays, there is a greater rapprochement between what is shown, told, and the intended message. It is more than a nuance. As a result, I believe I am currently making theater that is much more accessible. One could call it naturalistic and therefore popular. This would imply that I am an artistic conservatism, in the sense that my form of expression is approaching the dominant form in all arts, something directly accessible, directly understandable, directly perceptible. I did not do it only by calculation. If I did it partly by calculation, in the sense that a part of me might have feared not finding enough echo, reception, understanding, adhesion, it is not only for that reason that I took this path. There is a part of me that has a lot to say in this way, a way that could also be called concrete, an approach almost documentary in some cases. A part of me enjoys working this way a lot. Among all the avenues to explore in my artistic life, all the potentials, it was important that I develop, explore, and continue to develop it until it naturally exhausts itself, not by disgust, but by satiation. Thus, it should be said that with this play in progress, I did not take the risk of renewing my form of artistic expression. And even if I abandon the narrative in this sense, I take a risk regarding comprehension, readability. Besides, I know that my message will still be very accessible to others. I like working on everyday language, for instance. I feel like I have found almost an ease, undoubtedly coming from the accumulation of countless hours of work, and also from maturity. I want to let that express itself because it is like the product of an achievement. Of course, the question remains of when this will stop. When will I move elsewhere? When will I feel the desire and necessity to do so? Moreover, there is one thing we haven't talked about, which constitutes me, and I smile a little because what I'm going to say is a bit pompous. It is that I am both very structured in my work and very incoherent. More kindly put, my artistic personality is not very unified. That is, I believe I do not have a single identity on a sensitive, aesthetic, and even philosophical level. I am almost a zealot, to use the character from a Woody Allen film. That is also why I have such difficulty finding a synthesis, a discourse, and feeling legitimate as an artist, simply feeling in a straightforward relationship with communication about my work. I am truly animated by several personalities that must share the commands and tools of my creation. At times, these personalities work together, forming a sort of community or association, with consensus and compromises. But in some cases, I feel that this is not possible, and ultimately the steering, the direction of operations, is left to one personality to whom the others say, a bit like in the formation of a government, "Listen, I don't agree with your major options, I'm not part of it, I prefer to wait for the moment when I really have the opportunity to express myself, govern without me." This dialogue within me is something almost concrete. I do not keep a diary. I have done very little introspection, but I have known all this for some time. I also think of Pessoa, a very enlightening example for me of the possibility of living this phenomenon. He gave an external and real life to his various inner personalities. He allowed them to express themselves individually rather than seeking a compromise between them, which is difficult to find and probably counterproductive on a creative level. He built works that were entirely the expression of a coherent part of himself and in total opposition to other of his personalities. It is a way of leading one's life and creation that interests me and even makes me dream. In my personal life, I have this project of taking 1 or 2 years of distance from my company, completely disengaging from creation work and show support. There will be moments dedicated to simple life, travel, and moments to reflect on the continuity of my work for the future. With, why not, different writing practices, another approach to theatrical writing, why not in contradiction to what I have always said, for example, writing a play without the stage, which would require particular, longer work. After all this, I would like to resume my place and work with my company, continue to create for and with it. I would like my company to continue to live, but I would also like to invent and create something else, following the model I mentioned earlier. I would like to try to materialize these different impulses, these artistic desires I feel inside me, and let them live autonomously. For instance, by creating other creative identities besides Joël Pommerat, to give existence and a name to other aesthetic and philosophical sensibilities that constitute me. I could create other companies directed and animated by other Louis Brouillards, thus make shows under other identities. Besides, Louis Brouillard, who is an imaginary figure that gave his name to my company, could also start creating. All this creation of identities should be done with great transparency to avoid the phantomas and childish aspect of it, and because it would be impossible and uninteresting to keep the secret anyway. On the contrary, I would explain why I got there. I would expose the reasons that make me act this way, what it allows me to do and liberate in me, what makes me need to go through this to evolve. One certainty, it would always happen in the theater, because it is my path, because theater is my philosophy of life, and because in life, one must make choices and stick to them. It is like a calculation, a bet. I choose continuity and persistence over diversification. But in this constancy, in this persistence with the theater, I would like to find the possibility to escape, to diversify, to become like what I experience internally. That is to say, truly be multiple.